Hey, everybody, it's Tim with the University of Vinyl. I've got a special episode today. I am going to be talking CTI Jazz and some biographical stuff about Creed Taylor, who we lost just over about a month ago now. But I am really pleased to introduce to you, if you watch my channel, I'm sure you know this person, but I want to bring on Rob from the Wax. I'm going to have to interrupt, the 8 out of 10, vinyl community live streams that Rob partakes in. He's decided to clear a few minutes today. How are you, Rob?
All right, Tim. How you doing?
Good. So right off the bat, I wanted to kind of throw out a disclaimer. I am certainly not a jazz expert. That's why I wanted to bring the Waxed on, and Rob is much more versed in jazz than I am. But part of this whole hobby that we're afflicted with is kind of learning as you go, kind of copying vibes to new music and digging into it as you go, and maybe as you start collecting this stuff. Well, hopefully, it's all about the music, right? That's what our friend Mazzy says.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But one cool thing, I guess I'll just kind of start out and talk about the CTI label, which, Creed Taylor arguably is probably most famous for. He's got a very interesting bio. He's a pretty important person in the jazz world. But the thing about CTI Jazz that I like is, and I read a quote about this. He recently died, but there was an obit that I read, and the quote was, in the 1970s, CTI wasn't just a label. It was kind of it was a whole sound and a whole package, similar to Motown. People knew what they were getting when they bought a CTI Jazz album. And mainly, and that was, by design from Creed Taylor, he was very concerned about visual optics and attractive covers. These things were all gatefolds. They featured amazing photography. I think Pete Turner did all of the photography for all of most of the albums. But, really striking photography. So that was one thing. And then, importantly, he worked with Rudy Van Gelder, I think waxed kind of on an exclusive basis, like everything that on CTI was cut by Rudy Van Gelder.
I don't know if 100%, but a lot of it was.
Most of it was.
And not to go, you had mentioned Motown. They actually were distributed by Motown, distributed the label. But the thing about Rudy Van Gelder, and we get all these reissues, he was known for doing all the Blue Note stuff. He did all of the Prestige in the early days. And
right.
you can find his stuff to find an original Van Gelder, but they're often kind of roughed up and stuff. Well, he's in the dead wax on these. So these are probably the easiest to obtain in really good condition to hear how good of a mastering engineer he was.
Important point, because I love finding great sounding music out in the wild. And again, the whole package, this is a very attractive package. And then you put some of these albums on, and in the 1970s, jazz was still a very popular music form. It always was a popular music form. And Creed Taylor, he kind of saw, in the mid 60s, rock and roll was kind of taking over, moving into the forefront. And this is a two-edged, or this might be it's not a controversial comment. So there is a knock on Creed Taylor for being, accessible and maybe even moving into a realm of easy listening. And we can talk about that on maybe some particular albums, but that was kind of the snobs knock on Creed Taylor and CTI. But again, you can find these albums, in great condition for between $5 and $20 out there.
Well,
And
yeah, they're starting to, people are catching on.
yep,
So the cost of these, since I've been collecting the short time,
yep,
these you used to be able to find for under 15.
right.
Now there's going to be one album I show that I paid $50 for.
Okay,
So,
wow. I paid
yeah.
40. I paid 40 for one. It happened to be a white label promo, which I love finding. But that was the most I paid. But here in northern Colorado, there's a couple stores that have some pretty deep jazz stacks, and I keep coming across these things. And there's one over here that I paid like $7 for, a Hubert Waz.
Yeah, he's probably on the lower end of desirable,
right.
Their artists, but yeah. But the great thing you didn't mention about CTI too is they were a true stable of performers that were very ancestral.
Right.
They played on everyone's albums,
right?
So yeah,
and these were not slouches by any name. We're talking Herbie Hancock, we're talking Ron Carter, Jack DeJohnette. These were known commercial entities, at that time, and legendary names, if we want to be frank.
And
so Creed Taylor, he started his career in the early 1950s. I think the first label he worked for he started in 1954. He was in the Marines. He went to Duke University. Started working with Bethlehem, a label I'm not familiar with at all.
I have Bethlehem's definitely known for a lot of their jazz titles, but from what I also understand, I think they had a lot of faith records. They were putting out, stuff like that. But definitely, like very valuable. I've found some really red label mono Bethlehems that go for dough. Yeah, very close.
Nice. After Bethlehem, he moved on to ABC Paramount. Now, the important thing here is, while at ABC Paramount, he actually founded a subsidiary label, Impulse, in 1960 and signed none other than John Coltrane. So this guy is definitely, a historical figure. Went to Verve in 1961 and produced, the great Getz Gilberto album. I think that came out in 64. It's a landmark jazz album. And then I think he produced The Girl from Ipanema, which was a big crossover mainstream hit in the mid 60s.
Yeah.
Then he ended up going to A&M in 1967 and actually formed CTI, which is Creed Taylor Incorporated, I think. And he was being funded and kind of subsidized by A&M. And after being in that kind of setup for 3 years, he took CTI independent, and that ran from, I think, 1970 up to like 77, 78, something like that, Rob?
I don't know exactly when they stopped. I know that if you watch stuff on a lot of the musicians that were on the label, they constantly had money issues. Like they would say they didn't have enough money to do a lot of things.
Right.
But he did CTI stuff. I was reading, like, up until 2009, he did a tour. He did like an all-star tour with CTI musicians.
Cool.
So yeah.
So I mean, he was very much a kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, and very kind of concerned with the overall kind of health and awareness of jazz as a music form. And that's why he wanted to kind of put out a quality product, and that's why he worked with Rudy Van Gelder. And another thing I've noticed with these albums, over looking at the sound aspect, and I think Van Gelder kind of has a signature sound out there as far as how he cut things and mic'd things up and recorded people. But all of these albums sound fantastic. They're all kind of cut hot, and there's plenty of space. There's room for kind of this instrumentation to breathe, and they all sound great. Now, whether or not you like the music, that's kind of the bottom line.
Well, it probably at its best is contemporary jazz, and people talk about jazz fusion, and I'll talk about one of the albums in particular I have, but it was more of an accessible jazz fusion. It wasn't the kind of stuff Miles Davis was doing at the same time, which was more on you could say kind of on the experimental side of stuff.
Sure, yeah. Going out there a little bit, yeah.
But this was more contained stuff that they were doing. Yeah,
that was another thing. I think he saw, Miles Davis in the late '60s into the early '70s was moving out a bit, and Creed Taylor. He thought it was important, to keep jazz popular and moving into the forefront, or trying to regain the forefront, let's say, from pop and rock. He didn't want things to get too far out there. I think that's a solid comment.
Yeah. Well, if you look, the most comparable artist they had in their stable was Freddie Hubbard to what Miles was doing, and. And I'll show Freddie Hubbard. The record I'm talking about is Red Clay. But if you compare that, it's more accessible than the stuff Miles was doing at the same time. And it's like, I don't know how many exact albums Hubbard did, maybe 7 or 8.
Yeah.
But you can see you can make him career parallels to both of them at the same time.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll start off with. Rob and I have both just kind of picked 5 records that we like or we think are interesting. I think Rob's got a subsidiary. Creed Taylor started a subsidiary label called Kudu. I don't know when that exactly happened, and we'll let Rob cover that when he covers his record. But Kudu was another interesting label, and that stuff is more fusiony, I think, and even more.
It's soul. I think it was more drawn. Well, soul jazz. To kind of get more into the funky R&B area, which is more popular. Do you want me? I could start showing.
Let's start with Rob here. Let me move over to you. Yeah, you go ahead, man.
I recently found this Grant Green album, The Main Attraction, with Tim had in his background Herbert Laws on the stable of CTI artists. And I found a white label promo.
Nice.
And nice. And it's there's the stamp on the back. The lineup here is pretty large. Who played on here?
Right.
Yeah. I have John Faddis and another CTI artist, Joe Farrell, saxophonist, Mike Brucker. But it's very soul jazz. It's very funky. It's I could see it being a little more at the time popular with people who are into soul music and not particularly into jazz. But it's really good. Side 1 on here is there. It's considerably better. It sort of goes into the 2 faces of Creed Taylor, where this side 1 is some funky stuff. Side 2 kind of ventures more into the more easier listening aspect of it, but still soul jazz. But it's a great album, and I might have Grover Washington Jr., I believe, is a big artist on Kudu. So a lot of his albums that you would find in the wild. Are on Kudu.
I've got a couple of Grover Kudus as well. Yep.
Yeah. So good album. I recommend it.
Interesting thing, I noticed the bass player Will Lee. I'm pretty sure that was Letterman's. David Letterman. Bass player for the entire time that Letterman was. Anyway, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What year was that?
This is 70. This might be in the tail end. I think this is 76 or 77. But I mean, to get when I said side one is funky, the whole side one is one song. So,
right. Oh yeah, right. Cool. All right. I'm going to switch over to me here, and may as well talk about this album that we kind of started out talking about. This is Blue Moses, Randy Weston, incredible cover art. And you can see that whole kind of effect there. Now, the cool thing about these albums, they did list all the players and the actual recording dates. There's a picture of Randy Weston. I wasn't really familiar with Weston much, but, pretty good, acclaimed electric piano player. The cool thing about this album, Freddie Hubbard, Grover Washington Jr. on sax, Hubert Laws, who else? Bill Cobham on drums, Ron Carter on bass, and some people on percussion, etc. A whole horn section, trumpet, flugelhorn, bunch of people. Now, this album was arranged by kind of a controversial figure. If you read about CTI, Don Sebesky, this guy is kind of derided sometimes for, over arranging things, a little too syrupy, maybe too many strings, too much stuff going on. But Randy Weston's kind of a cool character. He was actually living in Morocco, and this album is, I took a few notes. It's, there's only 4 songs on it, and it's kind of drenched in this West African Moroccan music called Gnawa, Gnawa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not. But a lot of great stuff on here. Now, the first track is called Ephraim, and my notes here is that it's all about Freddie Hubbard. I mean, he kind of steals the song, and it sounds fantastic. Grover Washington Jr.'s got an extended sax as well. Track 2 is called Gnawa, Blue Moses. So the title track, 13 minutes long. Kind of a moody beginning between Weston's electric piano. Hubert Law comes in on flute. Good solos from Freddie and Grover as well. Side 2 on this is a little more chill and a little more moody, a little more atmospheric, but this was really easy to get into. I think it's a great album. I think if you go, when I started looking around for CTI jazz stuff, I would Google, hey, top 10 CTI jazz titles, and this typically shows up in the top 10. So that was Blue Moses. That was released in 1972.
Well, I do have a few Randy Weston albums.
Okay.
And I have a Blue Note stuff he did, but he was big time into the African rhythms in his music. I recently got a twofer from 2 early 60s albums he did, and definitely a lot of that stuff. So he was kind of more into the avant-garde in his but a great musician. So highly recommend Randy Weston stuff. I was
reading the Wikipedia entry on that album, and he actually, years later thought that, this Don Sebesky guy had kind of dressed the album up a little too much, and it was a little more commercial than he had anticipated. But I think it was one of his best-selling albums at the end of the day. So
Yeah. I have stuff that Don Sebaski was a prevalent producer and arranger, and the only other person I can compare him to is Gil Evans. If you get into Gil Evans stuff,
okay.
But Gil, towards more in the end of Gil Evans' career, he got a little more experimental. He did a jazz album of all Jimi Hendrix music, and which is quite good. And
Nice.
but yeah, Don Sebaski's an interesting character. You could do a whole video on him. So, all right, what do I pull out next? Let's pull this out. Paul Desmond. I know he did a handful of albums for CTI.
Yeah.
Skylark is a good one. This has, like you were talking, the typical lineup there.
Yeah.
Bob James was on a lot of stuff. I think Bob James might have produced a few CTI albums. Jack DeJohnette, Ron Carter. There you go, like the inside there. There's Paul Desmond. Paul Desmond has the very distinct style of playing sax. Obviously, he played with Dave Brubeck. And
right.
This is, going, you're talking about not the easy listening, but the very accessible jazz that Creed Terra wanted. That was Paul Desmond style. So, this isn't gonna, make you think too much. This will just put you like in that kind of chill area. And then also featured on here, I always pronounce his name wrong, but Gabar Sazbo.
Sabo, yeah.
But kind of very, he's I believe he's Czechoslovakian. I think he is. But he came here. He played with Chico Hamilton and had a very distinctive career. Unfortunately, passed away young. I think he was 45. But if he's always adds a great kind of dynamic. You have such a more straightforward kind of, I don't know if you would call Paul Desmond, but kind of distinct kind of sound. Bookend with his kind of unique guitar playing. So recommend the album there on that.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I actually was gonna save this one for last, but I'm gonna go with this first or second now. This is a Freddie Hubbard title, 1975, and this was the last Freddie album with CTI, and kind of a hokey. Someone I was reading something about this. Someone saying, "Yeah, not the best Freddie picture. It looks like he's kind of been caught, looking in the cookie jar or something." But Rob had mentioned just earlier, some of these albums, they're not as compelling as others. This album, I thought, a little too kind of a little too commercial, a little too kind of easy listening until we get to the last song on side 2, which is Son of Skydive. And the interesting thing on this one, well, most of these albums, they list the players on every track. And I'm pretty sure this was arranged by Don Sebaski. But the last track was not. So the last track was just a sextet, and it was more kind of moving back into kind of a post-bop vibe and less of that kind of orchestration with the strings and too many horns. But a very good song. But, the rest of this album, I was doing some listening yesterday so I could hopefully sound, intelligent today. Most of this album, especially side 1, didn't move me a lot, and I actually put it on when I was making dinner last night, and it worked well for that. So, but that is 1975 Polar AC, Freddie Hubbard. The interesting thing about these albums, Rob, I bet you'll agree, even if the entire album is not that compelling, one or two tracks will kind of keep you coming back for more, and you know, you'll get kind of a remembrance of that track. Like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. I'd like to hear that again. So you know, and you're not going to get killed for paying $11 for an album that maybe only has one or two good songs on it, right?
Well, what you're saying makes sense after I tell you about that album.
Okay.
So that was put out after he left the label.
Well, okay, interesting.
So, and it was made up of several different sessions over the course of his career at CTI. So
Okay.
some stuff was done in 71, 2, 3, and 4. So
that explains on the, you know, usually they'll list like, you know, 2 days in late 1972 and the album came out in January 73. There's no session dates here, so that's interesting.
No, so it was based on the success. He was probably their best seller,
right?
And they had sessions that weren't put on any albums. Then it's it's sort of a comp of Freddie Hubbard stuff. So it makes sense. There's no fluidity to the album. What you're saying, it makes sense based on that. Okay. So yeah, I have that album too. That's great. So all right. I believe this is the only Bill Evans album that CTI put out. It's he did three of his live performances at the Montreal Jazz Festival.
Right.
It's, are on albums. There's a famous one, the first one. This is the second one that CTI put out, and I'll pull it out. I'm a big Bill Evans fan. That was this trio. Eddie Gomez was with Bill Evans for a long while, maybe the longest out of anybody who played with him, and Marty Morell. Nice cover. But if you know Bill Evans, this is straight up great trio, piano, heavy bass, Bill Evans stuff, and it's a good album. I mean, it's a shame that they only did. I don't think I'm wrong that they only did this one album, but very good. Yeah.
Okay, so, cool. Thanks, Max.
Not much to say on that one.
Gotcha. Move over to me again. The next album I have, I guess I'll talk about this George Benson album. This was Beyond the Blue Horizon. This is kind of an interesting cover. I was reading when Creed Taylor had CTI as part of A&M, all of the covers were white. And then they moved to black when Creed Taylor went independent with CTI. So, but this is actually not an A&M subsidized title. So this was still white. So I don't know what that was that I was reading, but now this is interesting. So this album came out in 1971. George Benson, of course, Ron Carter on bass, Jack DeJohnette again on drums, Clarence Palmer on organ, a couple guys on percussion. Awesome photo of Benson there. And they decided to do a cover song of So What, which was the first song on Kind of Blue, for Miles. And that's a really kind of cool take. It's hard to recognize from the Miles Davis version. I'm just going to check some of my notes here. Yeah, I wrote a funkified cover of the great Kind of Blue track. Awesome drumming, Ron Carter anchoring things on bass, cool organ lines by Clarence Palmer. The other note I had here is that side one I thought was much more compelling than side two. But if you only know, George Benson from those really commercial, he basically crossed over to pop mainstream in 1979, 1980 with Breezin' and the other album. The guy's an incredible guitar player, just incredible feel and tone. Kind of use those those open body guitars, electric guitars. Great tone on this, and this is recommended if you could find this. This also kind of appears in frequently in like the top 10, best jazz or best CTI titles. And I think Benson did 4 or 5 albums with CTI before kind of looking for greener pastures and more money.
Yes. Well, I think that's like right after the CTI ended. That's kind of when he fell into the mainstream. Like he was in pop. He started putting out pop songs, right?
Right.
Okay. When I was referring to the most I spent on a CTI album, it's this one, this Chet Baker.
Okay, yeah. See, I've never seen that over where I am. Interesting.
Well, you can music on vinyl has the one that's in print right now is a music in vinyl version.
Right.
So you can get this a new version of it.
Okay.
This was an OG, Van Gelder in the Dead Wax one, and like I said, it has that typical. There's Don Serbesky arranging it with everybody. The thing that distinguished this album is they called it Chet Baker's kind of comeback album. It followed several years of inactivity. He was always had the drug problem. So, but this is a really good album, especially if you let Chet Baker. It's very smooth. His voice is in good form on this. I know he did an album that came out for Record Store Day called Albert's House, where the guy who put the money up for the album was trying to help him get back on his feet because he had lost his teeth, and you could hear it in that album. Like he's just he can make no sound out of the trumpet. It's a horrible album, but this is so very good. This is a good album. Nice. There he is, looking reasonably good. Highly recommend it.
Not smiling, not showing any teeth. Wonder why.
Well, because they're all fake. Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know, but highly recommend it. It is like with the Don Serbesky, it is smooth, but it's really good, and it's a good mix of him. His trumpet sounds great, and his singing voice sounds pretty sturdy on this. So I recommend it. Some people have questioned this cover, but that's a woman's face. There's her eyeball. So.
Oh yeah, okay. I wasn't picking that up.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's her side of her lips.
Oh yeah, it's much more. Yeah.
Nice. And with something we didn't mention, I like these. The inner sleeves they had on there.
Right.
Just take brown circle inner sleeves. So, highly recommend this album. This is one of the titles because Chet Baker appeals. I have a couple CDs because always these CTI CDs have a lot of extra stuff on them. I have the CD of this has like 4 or 5 extra songs.
Okay.
There's a Paul Desmond album that Chet Baker's on. So I think he's on a couple other ones, but this is the only one where he's the lead on it, I believe. So yeah.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we're each going to do 2 more.
Yeah.
And let's see. So I'm gonna go with the favorite thing that I've found so far as just the music is concerned. And again, when I set this up with Rob, I told Rob, well, I'm gonna choose 5 and I'll let you know which 5 I chose. And I sent him my list, and Rob's like, geez, thanks for saving a few for me.
Yeah.
Joe Farrell, Moon Germs. I think this is 1973. I was watching one of those Jazz Shepherd videos, and he did a 3-part series on CTI. It's actually pretty nice, pretty well done. If you like the Jazz Shepherd, and he was talking about Joe Farrell, kind of a lot of his CTI albums have got this eyeball showing up kind of in different places, and it's kind of his signature thing. So. But anyway, yeah, very cool, kind of interesting, eye-catching cover as usual. Joe Farrell, great sax player. reading about him, Wax, he also had drug issues, and I don't know if he had diabetes or something, but he died. He died like way too young as well, like late 40s, early 50s, I think.
I think it was more the younger 40s, but it was not good.
Yeah. A lot of the CTI jazz albums, later on in history, the hip hop guys really dug a lot of this stuff because a lot of it was moving into fusion-y stuff and R&B and even the kudu stuff. A lot of this stuff has been sampled in different songs and albums. I actually found a website that will list all of the samples that were taken, and this was a heavily sampled album. First track on this is called Great Gorge. It's incredible. It's a great song, very, very kind of funky. It kind of a slow burn to it, and moving into Farrell's, lots of very cool sax solos, and he also played flute as well. Other players on this: Herbie Hancock, Stanley Clark is on bass, so it's kind of cool. Jack DeJohnette again on drums, and this is more of a traditional. It's kind of a fusion-y, but a traditional jazz album as far as this instrumentation. There's no strings, there's no Don Sebesky doing any arranging on here, and I think it holds up really, really well. This is a great album, and I think I found this for $15 or $16 in great shape.
That's going up in price. Particular album.
The secret's kind of out on this one, and this is a cool album. But out of everything that I've heard, other than a couple, I think that Rob are going to cover, a couple of the one of the Freddie albums is amazing.
Yeah,
Red Clay, spoiler alert, but that Moon Germs is a cool album. I like it.
I'll tell you one thing about I almost wanted to just show all Joe Farrell CTI albums,
right?
Because he's the one artist on that label. None of his albums are the same.
Cool.
So there's one that has two different covers. I think they reissued it shortly after it came out with a different one. I have it over here. I'm not going to hunt for it,
right.
But he has one called Can Funk that is just a whole funk album.
I've seen that. I'm going to pick that up. Yeah.
No, it has the eyeballs and like a peach can.
Yeah, right.
If you want to venture into one of the stable of CTI artists, Joe Farrell's the guy to go into, because I honestly say his albums are vastly different. There's one that, if you know the ECM label, which is kind of more avant-garde, free jazz, his he has one album with Chick Corea on there. You could easily consider that a CTI album. I'm not CTI, an ECM album. It is very avant-garde-ish. So yeah, Joe Farrell's awesome. Okay. All right, cool. I'll save one for last. So some people consider this album to be the best CTI album. And this is Jim Hall Concerto. And forgive my colors reflect back into my camera. This is navy blue. It comes off looking green. But on here, it's a Don Sebesky. But the lineup on here is great. So you have Paul Desmond, Chet Baker, Ron Carter, Steve Gadd is a great drummer, and Roland Hanna. I actually over the weekend found a Roland Hanna album, which I have not listened to yet. So
interesting.
So I can't speak to him. But
so Steve Gadd, of course, was on Asia, Steely Dan, and a couple other Steely Dan titles.
Yeah, and if you know Jim Hall, great jazz guitarist, played with Chico Hamilton back in the 50s, and that back then that was kind of avant-garde stuff. But this is a great album, and the whole second side is just one. I don't know, like the lineup of the songs on here.
Right, one song or one track.
It's a jazz version of the classical classic.
Right.
But I highly recommend this album. It is just just it's, to put it into words, I'm struggling. But I also have this 80s reissue, which is also Van Gelder's plates, so it's the same pressing, I guess. You might be able to find this a little more affordable. These CTI 80s reissues are not the traditional gatefold. They're not as nice of covers. They're not even close to being the same. I do not know. I assume they cheaped out on the covers. They were too much to use, because this was issued in the early 80s. So if they stopped doing stuff in the 70s, I'm thinking Creed Taylor were still putting out albums, but the cost of doing these expensive jackets were the first casualty of the end of CTI. And I do not know where they went to this brownish different color, but yes, still the album sounds just as good. It's a great sounding Van Gelder pressing of the album. So if you're gonna get one of their better albums, this is it, in my opinion. But a lot of other people's opinions too.
Cool. All right. Last album for me, and then Rob's got another one as well. We're trying to breeze through here. We both like to talk, and this thing's we're pushing 45 minutes here. Okay. Again, this is like one of these top 10. You'll find this in the list, but this is Milt Jackson, Sunflower. Again, really kind of iconic cover art. Photographed by Pete Turner. Cool thing about this one, it was a white label promo. Didn't have the original inner, but definitely a white label promo. Sounds great. Milt Jackson, I'm not 100% checked out on him either, but great vibraphone player. I actually made my wife sit through this album. It was Sunday afternoon, and I think it was at the end of a football game. And before I made dinner, I put this album on too. And she's like, "Wow, lots of vibes." I'm like, "Well, Milt Jackson's a vibraphone player." Who else do we have on this with him? Herbie on piano, Ron Carter on bass, the usual suspects, Billy Cobham on drums, Ralph McDonald percussion, Jay Berliner playing a little kind of jazzy guitar as well. He was a session guy that I remember seeing Jay Berliner on some liner notes and some rock albums. Maybe Steely, he might have been on Gaucho. I'm not 100%. I'm just throwing it out there. And a bunch of strings on this as well. There's like 8 different violin players. This is a really, really solid album. I liked it, just kind of buying this and never hearing it, but I decided I wanted to kind of start collecting some of this stuff, some of the CTI. I've got a few notes here. Side 1, For Someone I Love, extended solos by Milt Jackson and Freddie Hubbard. Herbie on piano. Element of Polish is added with strings, courtesy of Don Sebesky. Anyway. Oh, there's an interesting cover on side 2, a stylistic song, People Make the World Go Round. Kind of funked up as well. I remember a particular note I made here. Ron Carter was really kind of locked in with Billy Cobham on that song. Solid album. Again, if you're a sucker and look at the top 10 list, this album will show up frequently in the best CTI jazz titles to seek out. When did this thing come out? This came out in 1973. Over to you, Wax.
Okay. Last but not least, I think this is what people, like I said, people consider the Jim Hall album to be the best. But I think this is probably the best CTI album. Freddie Hubbard, Red Clay. In fact, I believe Red Clay was such a defining song for him. He was pretty much known for it. from the 70s on that he would
Mm.
perform it live a lot, you know. And
Right.
on this album, you just got probably the most killer lineup on CTI, because adding Joe Henderson on saxophone
Right.
and Herbie and Ron and Lenny White on drums, this is just a killer album from beginning to end. Like I said, they were distributed. There's on mine, the sticker is distributed by Motown.
Yeah.
This is, I found this OG. I paid $40 for it. This is one. This was reissued a couple times recently. If you know Org, and Org did, I think, a 45 version of this maybe 4 years ago. You can't get that thing cheap. And there's, I think, a Pure Pleasure, maybe one that is still maybe in print, but they haven't pressed it in a while. So definitely in the original with the Van Gelder stamp, hard to find. But this is just a killer album. If you're going to get one CTI album or listen, I have this on CD too with some. It has a bunch of extra stuff. I think you should stream and listen to it. It's just, this is, in my mind, the best CTI album. So
yeah, that's the first CTI. Like I say, I keep seeing these CTI titles in the bins here, and I actually got kind of lucky, and that's, I think, the first one that I bought just doing some research. And there's a lot of VC videos on Red Clay and the Freddie Hubbard CTI titles, but I think I picked that up not too long ago for like $30. So and then the Milton, I paid $40 for that, but the other titles I've gotten lucky, like between $7 and $15. So
that's usually right now for the, I'd say there's probably like 20% of the higher titles that are going up in price. Like I think Milt Jackson may have done 4 albums for CTI. I have a few of those.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can find them very affordably. If you go into a record store, chances are they've been sitting there and they haven't changed the price on them. You know, pick them up. If you're finding them for under $15, pick them up.
Yeah, I mean that could impact things. You know, the market on these maybe a little bit. You know, although he was kind of the guy behind the scenes, but he was the main architect, Creed Taylor. You know, bringing things full circle. He's passed away now, so who knows? You know, if we'll see any effect there on pricing.
Well, I think Sony owns the catalog after A&M, so there's a bunch of I think there's a Wes Montgomery CTI A&M records. There's a few of those. There's George Benson one. There's the George Benson Beatles album. That's A&M. So a bunch are owned by the ones that they did on A&M.
Mm-hmm.
That's controlled by them. But after they spun off, I think Sony controls the catalog. And, you know, the thing about Sony is they're not releasing tapes or anything. So I don't know on the future reissuing of these albums. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
If you guys are, if people watching, if you're at all interested, go look for the OGs, because for the time being, they're affordable. But some of these titles, like Rob has mentioned, are moving up. I think that's going to be a wrap. I want to thank Rob from the Waxed. If you guys have not check out Rob's channel, I'm definitely going to leave a link, and you've got to see this little sub series that he's going on right now, the Boomer Scalper.
Yeah, it definitely requires less brain cells than watching Tim's stuff. So that's all.
I'm trying to kind of loosen things up a little bit, based on the view count of this video and the interaction and the comments that we receive. Rob may or may not be back on a future collab with me.
Thank you. I'm glad I was given a trial. Thank you.
All right, cool. I'm gonna kill this. Stick around for a minute, Rob, if you can. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.